Okay, so I'm sure we all have questions to ask. Andrew and Dennis, would you like to jump in?
Yeah, I would like to understand. I'm interested in the process because we were planning possibly to run a campaign to have vote by mail in New York State by the primary in 2022. And I think that you just said it's possible because if we could get the constitutional amendment and then it was voted on in the 2021 general election and the citizens of New York approved it, then couldn't we have people working on legislation so that as soon as that was approved by the voters, we could have, would it take a special section or could we have legislation passed so that by the primary in 2022, it would be possible?
Well, what the approach I would suggest if we are going to go that route is to have legislation ready to go to direct the state board of elections to develop such a system, so that and because it takes time, you can't implement a system like that overnight in a state of this size with this many voters. And um, so it requires planning, and all of this work can be done now. Crafting the legislation to create a universal vote by mail or automatic vote by mail system in New York, and having those conversations about what you know what would we what would be required, what lessons do we want to draw from the different states that have implemented systems. They've done it in different ways. There are different ways to do it. So all of that work is important to do, during this time, while we're allowing the process to proceed to get no excuse absentee ballots in New York. But in addition to just the setting up a system like that, there also is a serious amount of public education that has to be done as well, because you're changing the way people are voting. But I do want to point out that you still have to have polling places. It's not like you're going to eliminate on-site polling places, even with a vote by mail system, because you're always going to have some people that maybe they moved, or they they didn't get their ballot in the mail, something, or some situation. You have to have the ability to go vote in person. But there we would be very much changing the sort of infrastructure and setup of elections as they have in other states. You have uh, obviously far fewer polling places, but you may have, for instance, you will have drop off locations, places you can drop off your ballots. And in fact, in the states that do have automatic vote by mail systems, over half the voters drop off their ballots rather than send them in the mail. They drop them off at polling designated drop boxes, or the board of elections, or whatever that state has set up.
Yeah, I noticed that in your bill, the Senate Bill 8120, I think that's what it is. Um, yes, 8120, it calls for all of that. It says,
Yeah.
yes, you can vote by mail. You'll all get a ballot, but you can drop it off. You can go to your polling place on election day. You don't even have to use the ballot. You can just go vote at the polling place. So every option is still available. Uh,
Yeah. Well, you will have, if you were to make, if we in New York were to make this system change so that you're voting, we are pursuing a vote by mail system, not just in a state of emergency, but in elections generally. there will be changes. You obviously wouldn't have all of the polling stations open. You wouldn't need them if people are voting by mail. Um, so you would have to have some, as I said. You have to do it in a way that you ensure that everyone can vote, and you're taking every circumstance into account. But it does look different. Elections look different in those states that have automatic vote by mail.
Yeah, we did a little polling, and we actually called the Warren County Board of Elections. I did that, and the indications we got from them are it actually would be less expensive because they already have a printer who can print all this. They could handle an election right now. Of course, that's a small county with not a lot of
Right.
voters, but they could
Did you
actually.
say Delaware County?
Pardon?
Is that what you said? Did you say Delaware
No,
County?
Warren County.
Oh,
Warren
Warren County.
County in
Okay.
upstate state New York, and
Right.
they said we could do it now. It would be less expensive. We would have fewer polling
Yeah.
places, but it would be helpful and would keep people safe. So planning
Yeah.
maybe
I
to
mean, for rural, yeah.
we're planning to do a
I
little
was gonna
more research and find out what
Mhm.
it would be like in the rest of the state. But
Yeah, it's certainly easier in very rural areas, and of course, Oregon is a very rural state, and we didn't talk about some of the benefits of it, but one benefit is that in areas where you don't have public transportation systems where transportation is an issue. uh, Having a vote by mail system can you know make it much easier for people to vote, which is very important. But it is in more for it's certainly a less costly solution for more, and probably easier to implement for very rural counties, compared to, say, New York City,
yeah,
or more densely populated areas. And there's, because you remember, all of those ballots have to be verified, they have to be counted. There's all kinds of technology out there, and the states that do have it, vote by mail systems, they're doing different things, availing themselves to different types of technology. But uh, there are ways to that it. Uh, there are technological solutions that have made vote by mail, uh, less cumbersome in terms of verifying and counting up the votes, etc. But there's still these are still major. Again, I keep saying it's a system change, so you want to take your time, do it correctly, and make sure that everyone is well educated, about the change.
yeah.
Okay, so maybe this is a good time to talk about the security of vote by mail or absentee ballot voting. Andrea and Dennis, I know that you have a lot of information on this too. So, can we open up and talk about how secure this method is? Or if there are any reasons of concern, let's share that here as well.
Well, we were wondering not just about security, but about any impediments to it. One would be cost, about actually getting a universal vote by mail system. So one would be cost, one would be
Mhm.
security,
Yeah.
and just a matter of the logistics, like you've been talking about, of actually getting everything ready, getting the technology ready, everything will flow smoothly. So there's three issues there. One of them
Hmm.
was security. We polled some of the BOEs, and they don't seem that think that security is a problem at all. Well, yeah, actually, I think we could say that because they describe to us the security they have in place now, that the ballots have a range. It starts with this number and it ends
Hmm.
with this number. And they check every ballot that comes in. They check it off a
Yeah.
list saying that voter's voted. If the voter goes to a polling place and votes again, they catch it and they go, they actually told us, well, sometimes older voters do that. They'll vote twice because they forget they thought
Yeah.
they sent their ballot in. But they seem to have a very robust way of making sure that everybody votes once and catching anything that uh, it does
Hmm.
come through. And then, of course, the logistics,
Right.
we talked to them about that, and that little BOE, they thought, no, it's not a problem for us. So maybe you could tell us about those
Hmm.
three things, the logistics and the security.
Right. Right. Well, I would just say that keep in mind that we've always had absentee voting, and a, literally a quarter of all votes cast in this country in 2018 were by absentee ballot. I mean, my dad, he just passed away, but this past November, but he uh, and um, uh, and all of his neighbors where he lived in a residential continuing care facility, they all voted by mail. They got their ballots in the mail, they voted by mail. And that was just, and a lot of seniors vote that way. It has, there is, a, you hear a lot from Republicans about voter fraud. It is uh, it just doesn't happen. I mean, it's so rare. It is really so rare. And again, like 250 million absentee ballots have been cast in this country since the year 2000, and there's been like 0.0000001, I think, um, questions of voter fraud. Like but having said that, you still have to take all there. It's different from in-person voting, and you have to take the precautions to make sure that votes are secure. And that's very important. But as I have a good friend from college who she's a professor at the University of Oregon, where they have vote by mail, and she said it's the ultimate it's got the ultimate paper trail. They're paper ballots that you're filling out. It's the ultimate paper trail. So you can do an audit of votes after an election, and there's um, but there are different systems that different states use, barcode systems to where each individual ballot has, is associated with the registered voter, that it has personal, information verifying who they are. I can't remember which state it was, but at least one state actually has a system, a barcode tracking system on the envelope um, through the postal service, so that you can actually track your ballot as a voter. You can see where your ballot is, whether there are um, you know pretty good systems in place that we can be using. We don't need that for absentee ballot voting right now, which is something we've been doing for a long time. But if we switched to an automatic vote by mail system, you would want to have those kinds of security systems in place.
One thing I wanted to mention in response to what you said is that it's talking about security has been a really common talking point among some Republicans, and I just think that's really unfortunate that it started to become a partisan issue, because it really doesn't need to be. And we've seen in those states, the states like Colorado, Hawaii, Oregon, Washington, Utah, it's had a lot of success, and not all of those states are Democratic
Yeah.
states. Utah especially is a Republican-leaning state, and from what I understand, the Republicans speak really favorably about it there too. And I
Yeah,
wish,
and they've come around in the other states as well. I
right,
mean, in Oregon, they had the story I heard is that they had initially fought it in Oregon, and what ultimately won them over in the state legislature was the fiscal savings argument of switching to a vote by mail system. But in the time since, I mean, they're people love their vote by mail system in the states that have it. They love it. They would never go back. And yeah, it's really it was unfortunate the comments that were made about the president. About it's just and there's no evidence that statistically there is no evidence that vote by mail helps one party over another, or that's another argument that's been made that is just not borne out by statistics. People just have to look at the data. The data tells a very clear story that this is a system that works.
Is there any bipartisan support for vote by mail in general?
Um, I don't. I I haven't heard a lot of bipartisan support for it in the state legislature and in the discussions about um, vote by mail. We just um, in the discussions of Senator Myrie's bill, the typical concerns about voter fraud were raised. So no, I would say that at least in terms of the state legislature, I don't see bipartisan support for this. Um, but you know,
I'm wondering after this year, though, after we go through two elections, I mean, at least for Democrats, the primary and the general election, people will have experienced absentee ballot voting. So after this year, do you think there'll be more support in general to make this a permanent law?
um, yeah, I think so. I mean, I also want to just one point I didn't mention, but that's really important to mention is that vote by mail reduces the hurdles for registered voters. I mean, I talked about transportation, but it's not just transportation. In these other states, you get to sit with your ballot for a period of time. Probably the time limits in different states, but at least a couple of weeks, right? You can, if you work 3 jobs, which a lot of people do. If you it's hard to get to the polls on election day, even with early voting. It can be just really difficult for people. Everyone's lives are over scheduled, super busy with work, with family, with everything else, and it's just much more convenient to be able to drop your ballot off at a drop off box or at the board of elections when you have the moment to do that, as opposed to during the limited number of polling hours. So they actually saw significant increase in voter turnout with vote by mail systems. And in New York, we've historically been just near the bottom in terms of voter turnout. I think that we're going to see a lot of improvement because we passed some important election reforms last year. But in Oregon, they saw 80% turnout in a presidential election. We can only hope. We can. That's a dream for here in New York State, which I hope we realize one day. But we're nowhere near that. So there has not we haven't talked about November yet at the state, or there hasn't been any. I should say there has not been any formal announcements about what's happening in November. I think that again, like everything during this pandemic, there's so much uncertainty. We don't know what it's going to be like in November, where we are going to be in terms of this public health crisis. From my perspective, planning is the key. Just making sure that you're ready. I think that we should look at uh, this primary election. We should learn from it. See what lessons we can draw from this experience, because we do have some new things in place, and make sure that whatever plan we come up with for November, we we invest in the voter education and outreach that needs to happen to make sure that people can exercise that most fundamental democratic right.
Well, we're here to help in that effort for sure.
Well, great. Thank you. It takes advocates. It takes everyone out helping get that message out. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Some of the some of the county board of elections have done a really good job too. I've seen some of the things they've sent out and well in advance of when they were sending the applications out and with the applications and everything. And I commend those county boards of elections.
Yeah, and they work so hard, and they are under just incredible pressure, with all of these changes. And those are the boots on the ground. Those are the people making the changes. So I always, from I'm always have that in my mind at the state level because they also are bearing costs. There are real costs to this. There was funding in the CARES Act for elections to help offset these additional costs during a pandemic, which would be helpful. But we have to be mindful of what we're imposing at the county level and provide them with whatever kind of and get their input. It is very different county to county. I mean, as you said, in Warren County, and I have counties in my district where it would be um, far more straightforward to implement vote by mail, and it would be preferable from their perspective. At least a couple of the elections commissioners I spoke with, and for others, it's more difficult. They're much more populous districts or counties, and so it's a mix. Not every county is the same.
Now, can we talk about vote by mail beyond 2020? Specifically, how to make this a permanent law in the state of New York. Dennis and Andrew, I know that this is the area that you're really interested in. So, how do we make this happen?
Yeah, one of the things we just talked about is how you think there are some really valuable lessons to be learned from this primary election coming up, and you were saying that that could have a lot of implications for November. I'm thinking that just the fact that as a state we had to ramp all this up so quickly just to, expand absentee ballots, that this is a really good sort of jumpstart to, use that momentum to shoot for vote by mail, maybe a lot sooner than we would have been able to otherwise. I think that's one of the things that makes me think potentially 2022 is a more reasonable goal than it would have been before all this happened. Whereas if you're going from the system the way we had it before, just a full vote by mail, we might not have been ready to go by 2022. So I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, well, certainly more people are going to be voting by mail, and we've already. There was just a New York Times article the other day, might have been yesterday, just about the huge increase in voting by mail in other states and absentee voting in other states, and in primary. So I think that I think definitely people's experience with it is going to be important, but we want them to have a good experience with it too. Their votes need to get counted, their ballots need to get in on time, and the like. But I just keep coming back to, when we're looking to the future, any changes we make in New York's election system, where we are in a very fortunate position in that we can learn from other states' experiences who have had this system in place for, well, in the case of Oregon, it's been 15 years. It's a lot. There's like long records of experience, and we're of course a different state than some of these other uh, more sparsely populated states. But we have, there's we, we're, we shouldn't reinvent the wheel. We should take advantage of the learned experience and build on that.
I'd like to get a little more clarification on the. I think you were talking about we could have legislation, be working on legislation and have it in place, have the bills ready to go, so that once the constitutional issues were settled, hopefully by the general election in 2021, we could be ready to go. If those bills could immediately be passed, we could make a primary 2022 deadline, or at least a general election 2022 deadline. And so you're,
Probably a more general election would be
yeah,
more
okay.
reasonable.
Uh,
That's another thing. I mean, again, these are all we need to look at the experience of other states, how long it took them to get the systems in place that
yeah,
they
I,
have.
I just was
Um,
more
you know,
interested in that. How would that process? What would be going on? And what uh, year the legislatures would take up certain things. Do you see any reason why the legislation actually couldn't be prepared and ready?
no, it could be a bill could theoretically be introduced next year.
Okay, good.
If that bill were to be introduced next year and for us to support it, which individuals and groups should we approach to build a powerful coalition and mount an effective campaign?
Well, certainly the members of the chairs and the members of the elections committees in the Senate and Assembly. Um, Senator Biaggi has had she I know is very interested in this issue and has put legislation in on this issue. She had introduced a bill to expand the absentee balloting excuses in New York so that people could vote during this pandemic. Uh, and I mentioned Senator Myri's bill. So I think those are natural. Um, I shouldn't say allies necessarily, but people to reach out to as potential allies um, on this.
And what is the role of a national campaign? I've been receiving emails from people like, Michelle Obama or Delgado pushing for vote by mail, but is there something that really can be done on a federal level? Or is this just strictly for PR to push vote by mail for each state?
I mean, as long as there are state constitutional issues, those have to be addressed. You can't um, override the state constitution. But it's important. Again, I think I, I'm a believer in collaborating with other states too, and that are interested in moving legislation forward. And um, there's, we've seen we've been collaborating with other states in our region on a wide range of issues, including in this pandemic. So I think it is a good approach.
Great. Do you have any other questions, Andrew and Dennis?
I was just going to ask if you have any other specific recommendations for us, anything that we can do to help in the meantime. You said, reaching out to the boards of election. We're actually planning on doing that, talk to as many commissioners from as many different counties as we can.
I think that's really important. I think it's really important to hear what concerns they have, what they feel about the different ways of voting. I would love to see a survey done of county boards of election commissioners on that. I think it would be very interesting. Um, but yeah, they absolutely have to be partners in the process. So I applaud your work in speaking with starting there with commissioners. I think that's really important, and definitely suggest continuing to have those discussions.
Great.
Well, we were planning on actually doing that research and focusing on those three areas that I mentioned before: the logistics, the cost, and the security, and asking them, could they be ready? Um, are there other things that you think, other types of information we need to do besides that? And maybe we can't be more specific than that right now, but
Yeah. I mean, I think that, I think you have to look into what other states are doing, and they might not know those costs. They might not, since it's not a legal option in New York right now, they probably, I would, unless they're serious vote by mail enthusiasts, they may not have investigated the costs of, say, that um, implementing the barcode technology that I referred to earlier, or the postal tracking technology, or and not to say that you have to have all of these technologies, but these are these have to be explored, and these costs have to be considered. It's definitely, as I said, it's not an overnight switch. It's going to take planning, and you want to make sure it's done right because you want to make sure every vote gets counted.
Great. Well, this can be one of the silver linings that can come out of these tragic, under these tragic circumstances. After the primary, we're going to start this survey and also a public educational campaign about vote by mail going into November election. There's another partner in this effort who could not be here today, but Indivisible New York, I think Ulster chapter or New York 19 chapter will be part of this campaign as well.
Great.
And Andrea and Dennis, if anyone's interested in finding out more about Represent Us, how can they find out? How can they get in touch with you?
Yes, it's representalbanyny@gmail.com. We also have a website, albanyrepresent.us is our website.
Thank you. And the web address for Forge Collective is forgeartcollective.org, and you can contact me through that website. Thank you so much, Senator. I know that this was a very busy week for you, so we really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Senator. Really appreciate your time.
thank you very much, Jennifer.